You're watching Local 24 News Midday.
It was a crime that horrified the nation and tore New York City apart. A brutal crime that made national headlines 30 years ago. A woman viciously sexually assaulted and beaten while jogging one night in Central Park. That night changed the lives of the victim, the teenagers convicted of the attack, and then it turned a park that was so loved into an object of fear. To tell us more about 2020's documentary airing tonight here on Local 24 is ABC's Terry Moran in Washington. Terry, thanks so much for joining us here this midday. Now, kind of fill us in on the story. Trisha Maley, she went on a run one night in Central Park and she was attacked. You got a chance to talk to her since then.
That's right, and she is a remarkable woman, John. She's not just survived, but she has thrived across one of the most horrific attacks you can imagine. There was so much pressure on police and prosecutors to solve this crime because, as you point out, it struck terror into the hearts of people in New York and really all over the country. And that night, they arrested 5 teenagers, some of them minor children, teenagers, all of them black or Latino. And after a long night of questioning, each of them confessed on videotape to the crime. This triggered a media frenzy. There was talk of wilding and these gangs of young men that were doing these horrific things out in Central Park. They were tried and convicted, sentenced to long years in prison, and then years later, in an astonishing twist, the real rapist came forward and confessed, and his DNA matched that found on the scene. So those convictions were overturned, those young men released from prison. And the question is, how could something like this happen? The answer really has to do with the fact that this whole case was right at that troubled crossroads of race and crime and justice that has really been with us throughout our history. We learn a lot about that. It still resonates today, as does the fact that right in the middle of the controversy back then was a rising New York City real estate developer, Donald Trump. He got involved too.
And Terry, speaking of President Trump, yeah, I remember there was a reward or an ad or something in the New York Times talking about bringing justice and the death penalty back involving this case. Did you get a chance to hear from the president about this case now? Did he, respond as far as, what his thoughts are on the teens that were involved at the time?
He's been asked about it during the campaign in particular. He did take out full-page ads in New York City newspapers calling for the death penalty for these teenagers at the time. He, as you can imagine, he has not backed down an inch from that, even though the real rapist has confessed and been demonstrated to be the person who perpetrated this assault. His line: these guys were no angels. They were doing something wrong. And frankly, that is what police and prosecutors maintain to this day. Even though those convictions were overturned, they believe that somehow these young men that really were the victims of a miscarriage of justice, having been convicted of rape, which they did not do, they believe that they were somehow involved. So this case remains an open wound, really, in the history of New York, one that can still touch us in so many ways, in particular in a good way, because Trisha Maley, the Central Park jogger, has survived and thrived in such a remarkable fashion. There's a lot of different emotions in these 2 hours.
Truly fascinating. Terry Moran, thank you for taking time to speak with us. And don't forget, you can watch the 2-hour 2020 documentary tonight right here on Local 24. One night in Central Park at 8 o'clock.